Imagine writing a single line of C++ to store, like a simple 4-byte integer, and by doing so, silently evicting 64 bytes of critical data from your CPU's L1 cache.
Yeah, it happens all the time in modern code bases.
Right. And when you are engineering at the systems level, that line between static type safety and dynamic flexibility is exactly where CPU cycles go to die.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, standard any was introduced in C++17 to solve a highly specific architectural void, but the hidden costs of type erasure.
Specifically regarding physical memory layout.
Exactly. Memory layout and instruction pipelines. They're often completely misunderstood until they suddenly bottleneck your application in a profiler.
So today we are executing a strict architectural teardown of standard any. We are opening up the original ISO proposals, going straight to the metal. We need to analyze the exact cache penalties, the branch mispredictions, and the application binary interface trade-offs happening under the hood when you utilize type erasure.
Well, to understand the modern implementation, you have to look at the exact problem standard any was built to solve, which means, moving past the undefined behavior of raw pointers.
Because historically, if you were building an event dispatcher or a plugin architecture, you would just use a void pointer.
Right. A void pointer is an indiscriminate memory reference. You cast arbitrary data, pass it along, and just hope the receiver knows what to do with it, which sacrifices all type safety. And critically, it sacrifices destructors entirely.
Yeah, if you miscast it upon retrieval, you don't get a nice runtime exception.
No, you get silent memory corruption. So in 2000, Keevil and Henney published a blueprint in the C++ report called Valued Conversions. He categorized types into 3 domains. Discriminated types, like standard variant.
Which is a closed, predefined set of types.
Exactly. Then indiscriminate types, like the void pointer, which know absolutely nothing about their payload. And finally, his hybrid generic variant value type.
Which supports copying any value, but strictly enforces safe, checked extraction against its exact original type identity. This actually became boost.any in 2001.
Right, giving it 15 years of field testing before standardization.
But wait, I have to push back here. If you are building a heterogeneous container, why wasn't standard object-oriented polymorphism enough? Why not just force all payloads to inherit from a common base class with virtual functions?
I mean, polymorphic base classes introduce severe inefficiencies at the systems level. First, you break encapsulation by forcing intrusive inheritance on user-defined types.
Right.
But look closely at the memory and instruction overhead. Every object now requires a virtual table pointer. Every method call requires a vtable lookup.
Which is an indirect function call.
Yes. It fundamentally blocks the compiler from performing devirtualization and inline expansion. The instruction prefetcher just cannot see through the pointer.
And if you want to store a primitive type, like a Boolean, you are forced to allocate a custom wrapper class on the heap. You are literally boxing primitive types.
You are invoking the global allocator for a single byte of data. In a multi-threaded environment, that means acquiring a lock on the heap manager, risking thread contention, and guaranteeing a cache miss every time you access that Boolean because it lives out in fragmented heap memory.
So Henney proved value-based erasure works, but ISO couldn't standardize something that trashes the allocator in a game engine.
Right. They needed a way to dodge the heap entirely. This drove the requirement for small buffer optimization, or as SBO.
Which means constructing the object directly in an internal statically sized byte array via placement new.
Exactly. When you assign an object to standard any, the implementation checks the size of that object. If it fits within the internal buffer capacity and the alignment requirements are satisfied, it avoids the heap.
Zero heap allocations. But doing that safely required a massive shift during the C++11 standardization, right? Specifically regarding move semantics.
Yes, SBO is only applied if the payload type satisfies a strict trait. It must have is no throw move constructible v equal to true. That trait is statically verified and non-negotiable.
Because if it throws during a move,
you'd have unrecoverable data loss. If a standard any object is moved from one memory location to another, the standard library has to move that internal buffer payload. If that throws halfway through the placement new transfer, the original object is in a partially destructed state.
Right. So by enforcing the no-throw guarantee, standard any ensures internal buffer transfers are provably safe. But because SBO fixes a statically sized buffer inside the standard any object, compiler vendors had to make ABI decisions.
Yeah, they had to lock in the memory footprint, and they chose drastically different paths. SBO solves the heap problem, but it creates a permanent ABI divergence.
Let's break down the 64-bit ABI memory footprints. GCC, using libstdc++, prioritized a minimal object footprint, right?
Right. A standard any object on GCC is exactly 16 bytes. That gives it an 8-byte SPO capacity, basically enough for one pointer or a double. It falls back to heap allocation extremely quickly.
And Clang, with lib++, went a bit bigger.
They took a balanced approach. Their standard any is 32 bytes, providing 24 bytes of SPO capacity. That is specifically optimized to hold small string instances and standard shared pointer blocks in line without hitting the heap.
Wait, let me stop you there and talk about MSVC. Because if Clang is 32 bytes and MSVC went for extreme heap avoidance.
Yeah. MSVC, via Dinkumware, utilizes a massive 64-byte footprint for a single standard any object. That gives them 56 bytes of SPO capacity.
Which perfectly aligns with a standard CPU cache line boundary. This is the exact scenario I brought up at the start, and it is a critical performance observation for anyone profiling their code.
It really is. A standard CPU pulls memory into the L1 cache in 64-byte chunks.
Right, so if you are on MSVC and you store standard any objects in a contiguous standard vector, and you are just storing simple 4-byte integers.
Every single element in that standard vector is consuming an entire 64-byte cache line. You're wasting 60 bytes of padding per element.
Exactly. Compared to GCC, where you can fit 4 standard any objects into a single cache line, on MSVC you only fit 1. If you open up your profiler right now and look at your memory bandwidth, you will see you are completely thrashing the L1 cache footprint.
You are evicting useful data from the cache 64 bytes at a time just to iterate over integers, destroying your spatial locality.
That is the invisible architectural cost of type erasure. You avoid the heap, but you bloat the cache footprint. It is a permanent ABI trade-off. But memory layout is only half the equation, right?
The other half is retrieving that memory securely. We've solved storage with SPO, but standard any cast must deterministically verify the requested type perfectly matches the originally stored type.
And by default, compilers handle that using C++ runtime type information. They capture the standard type info object using the type ID operator.
When you execute standard any cast, it runs a comparison using type info scope resolution operator equality.
But here is the reality in systems engineering. AAA game engines, high-frequency trading platforms, embedded systems. They heavily rely on the -fev no RT compiler flag.
They kill RTTI completely to strip out virtual table bloat and type info string records.
Which raises the ultimate question. How do standard libraries achieve absolute type safety for standard any cast when the developer explicitly disables the compiler's type identification system?
They bypass RTTI using a linker hack. Both GCC and Clang utilize static template instantiation to generate unique physical memory addresses, and they use those addresses as surrogate type identifiers.
Let's break down the exact code mechanics of that fallback, because it's fascinating.
Think of this like generating an architectural fingerprint. The standard library defines a helper template struct over a type T, and in that struct, they declare a static inline context per integer. Let's call it ID and set it to 1.
Because of strict C++ linkage rules and one definition rule folding, a static variable instantiated inside a template has a singular, globally unique physical memory address across the entire compiled binary. Wait, let me slow down and make sure I am visualizing this correctly. You assign a type T to standard any. The compiler instantiates that template for type T.
Right.
And standard any just stores the raw physical memory address of that static variable. Later, you execute standard any cast for type U. The compiler instantiates the template for type U, grabs its static variable address, and standard any simply compares the two raw memory addresses.
Precisely. If the pointers match, the type identity is verified with absolute certainty. It executes a static cast to extract the payload.
That is incredible. It is a zero overhead pointer comparison.
It's a zero overhead surrogate for polymorphic identification. GCC manages this via an internal static function whose address serves as the fingerprint, while Clang uses the static struct approach, but the linker level proof is identical.
You get runtime type verification without any of the computational bloat associated with RTTI. The linker hack is a pragmatic masterpiece.
It is. But while that survived standardization, other features did not. When standard any was formally integrated into C++17, there were severe architectural casualties.
Proposal P0302R1 ruthlessly exposed the failure of custom memory allocators.
The allocator controversy was heavily contested. Initially, the goal was to allow systems programmers to strictly control where the dynamic memory for a type erased payload was allocated. supporting memory pooling or specialized non-paged memory resources.
Which sounds great on paper, but implementing type-erased allocators proved to be a disaster across all major compiler vendors.
To support custom allocators in a type-erased container, standard ANI cannot just use the allocator to construct the initial payload. It has to capture and store a type-erased copy of the allocator itself so it can properly destroy the object later.
And if the standard ANI object is copy-assigned, the internal logic has to determine whether to propagate that custom allocator to the newly assigned state.
Right, adhering strictly to the propagate on container copy assignment rules, known as POCCA.
I was reading through the post-mortem on this. Let me get this straight. GCC looked at the memory overhead required to track all of that state and just completely omitted the allocator constructor.
Yeah, they didn't even try. And Clang actually provided the constructors to satisfy the API signature, but literally just silently ignored the allocator arguments during execution.
Wait, really? How did that even pass the committee?
It was an attempt to maintain API compatibility while vendors figured out the implementation details, but it induced massive technical debt. MSVC actually implemented them, but completely failed the POCCA propagation rules during assignment.
So because it was fundamentally broken, the committee made the pragmatic choice to aggressively prune it. They stripped allocator support entirely from standard ANI, standard function, and standard promise.
Modern standard ANI strictly falls back to global new and global delete. They prioritized deterministic correctness and ABI stability over an unworkable theoretical ideal.
But while they were pruning allocators, they also executed a major API harmonization via proposal P0032. They needed standard ANI to align semantically with standard optional and standard variant.
Which meant replacing the empty method with has value.
Because empty is fundamentally a container-centric concept, implying a sequential container with a variable size.
Right, standard ANI is an optional-like wrapper containing exactly one value or nothing. Retaining empty inverted the Boolean logic compared to standard optional, so it was permanently replaced with has value.
That proposal also introduced the make any factory function, which is absolutely critical for performance.
Oh, it is. It allows perfect forwarding for in-place construction. Instead of constructing a temporary object and moving it into standard ANI, make any forwards your arguments directly to the payload's constructor inside the erased storage boundary.
You bypass temporary move overhead entirely.
But even with make any bypassing that initial move, we have to address the glaring limitation of the standard ANI specification. It mandates that the contained type must model the copy constructible concept.
So you cannot store move-only types.
No. If you copy a standard ANI, it has to dynamically instantiate a deep copy of its underlying payload. This means standard ANI is statically prohibited from storing move-only types.
Meaning you cannot store a standard unique pointer in standard ANI. You cannot store hardware handles, standard threads, or standard futures. If your architecture relies on move-only semantics for resource safety, standard ANI blocks you completely.
This has forced the systems programming community to rely heavily on bespoke third-party solutions. Like Google's Chromium Core library implements a custom-based scope resolution operator, Unique ANI.
And Microsoft provides similar internal utilities specifically to manage non-copyable operating system handles. The lack of a standardized move-only type erasure wrapper remains a significant gap.
Which brings us to the bleeding edge of modern C++ compiler research. The missing unique ANI highlights the ongoing performance bottlenecks of type erasure.
Because even when you are strictly moving an SBO-optimized payload within standard ANI, you are hitting serious instruction pipeline overhead.
We discussed earlier how SBO allows the payload to live inside the internal buffer. But when you move that standard ANI object, you cannot just do a raw memory copy of that buffer. The contained object might possess a complex move constructor or rely on internal pointers to itself.
So standard ANI is forced to invoke the specific move constructor of the erased type via an internal manager function pointer.
And this is where the CPU pipeline stalls. If you look at your profiler during heavy reassignment of standard ANI objects, those CPU cycles you're losing at the destruction boundaries are indirect branch mispredictions.
You are executing an indirect function call through an opaque pointer. The CPU cannot prefetch the instructions.
Right, it blocks devirtualization and entirely prevents the compiler from inlining the move operations. Plus, you are generating and storing a highly specific move operation for every single type you ever place into standard ANI.
Which causes massive template instantiation bloat in your final executable.
This is exactly what proposal P1144, trivial relocatability, is designed to solve. P1144 introduces a compiler mechanism to detect whether a user-defined type is trivially relocatable.
If the compiler can verify that trait, it allows the standard library to bypass the generation of type-specific move constructors entirely.
Exactly. It replaces those bloated custom move operations with a highly optimized memshapi or memmove during SBO data transfers.
You eliminate the indirect function call, you eliminate the branch misprediction, and you radically reduce the compiled executable size.
It allows type erasure to operate at the speed of raw memory when transferring small objects, fundamentally altering the performance profile of standard any in high-throughput systems.
So what does this all mean for the systems engineer listening right now? Standard any represents the absolute frontier of dynamic typing within a statically typed language. It solves the void pointer problem with zero undefined behavior.
But it comes with invisible costs. Indirect branch mispredictions, massive cache line inflation on MSVC, and template bloat. You need to audit your event dispatchers, your message buses, and your plugin APIs.
Are you defaulting to standard any out of architectural laziness?
Standard any is a highly specialized tool, not a default generic container. If your domain of possible types is an open set, like bridging C++ to a Python runtime, standard any is exactly what you need.
But I challenge you to look at how you are using type erasure today. If you are passing payloads across a boundary where the types are actually a closed set known at compile time, you should be using standard variant.
Standard variant guarantees zero heap allocations. It fits perfectly in your cache lines without massive padding, and it enforces exact compile time pattern matching.
Why pay the runtime cost of standard any when the compiler can prove your architecture is safe before the code ever executes? Think about your memory layouts and stop letting the compiler make your ABI decisions for you.
And before we wrap this deep dive into the source material, consider this forward-looking implication. With static reflection finally slated for C++26, the entire premise of type erasure might be turned on its head.
Will we even need the linker hacks and surrogate fingerprints of standard any when the compiler can natively iterate over type layouts and query type IDs at compile time?
That is the real question. If static reflection gives us native compile time introspection, the runtime overhead of standard any might become a relic of the past.
That is something every systems engineer should be profiling and